Your ancestors ate better food than you do right now. Zero electricity, zero gas, zero matches. Yet Native Americans consistently produced perfectly cooked meals that required precise temperature control. The method they used seems physically impossible until you see exactly how they manipulated the laws of physics. Before there were gas grills and fancy outdoor kitchens, Native American cooks had already mastered the art of flame control using nothing but sticks, stones, and serious ingenuity. These weren't your backyard barbecue pits either. We're talking about sophisticated cooking systems that fed entire communities without a single piece of metal cookware. Most cooking happened right out in the open air where smoke could drift away and multiple families could share the workspace. Lodge fires were common too, though anyone who's ever sat around a campfire knows how smoky things could get indoors. The trick was building fires that burned hot but clean. Small, dry sticks worked better than big logs because they gave cooks precise heat control. But here's where it gets interesting. Animal dung wasn't just something to avoid stepping in. Buffalo chips and dried deer droppings made excellent fuel that burned steady and slow, perfect for long cooking sessions. Makes sense when you think about it, right? These materials were everywhere, burned cleanly, and kept a consistent temperature for hours. The real genius was in the setup itself. A single fire could handle multiple cooking tasks at once. Meat might be roasting on one side while vegetables steamed in bark containers nearby. Different zones around the fire offered different heat levels, turning each cooking area into a primitive but effective rangetop. Weather played a huge role in how these kitchens operated. Winter cooking meant building fires inside or creating windbreaks to protect flames from harsh conditions. Summer setups spread out more, taking advantage of warm air and longer daylight. Some tribes even had seasonal cooking spots they'd return to year after year, places where the wind patterns and natural shelters made fire management easier. Starting these fires required real skill too. No matches meant relying on flint and steel, or the even trickier method of creating sparks with just 2 pieces of stone. Dried plant fluff, stuff like cattail down or shredded bark, caught those tiny sparks and nursed them into flames. One wrong move, and you're back to rubbing sticks together. The whole system worked because everyone understood fire behavior, which woods burned hottest, how to bank coals for overnight cooking, when to add fuel without smothering the flames. This wasn't just about making dinner. It was about surviving and thriving in environments where a failed cooking fire could mean the difference between a feast and going hungry. And the weird part is, once you had that fire going strong, the real cooking magic could begin with tools that would make modern campers jealous. Forget fancy rotisseries and gas grills. Native Americans figured out the art of stick cooking thousands of years before anyone thought to patent a barbecue fork. They took whatever meat, fish, or root they had and jammed it onto a sharpened piece of wood. Simple? Absolutely. Effective? You bet. The trick wasn't just stabbing food randomly. These folks knew exactly which sticks worked best. Green wood didn't burn up fast, while certain types like willow bent without snapping when you twisted them over flames. Hunters would strip bark, sharpen one end to a fine point, and thread chunks of venison or whole fish like they were making the world's first kebab. But here's where it gets clever. Rotating the stick wasn't some mindless task. You had to turn it at just the right speed to cook evenly without charring one side. Too fast and the outside stayed raw while the inside burned. Too slow and you'd get tough, dry meat that could break your teeth. Some groups even rigged up leather thongs as makeshift rotisserie belts. They'd tie one end of the thong to the stick and the other to a bent branch, creating tension that slowly spun the meat without constant hand turning. Genius engineering using nothing but animal hide and wood. Small game like rabbits or birds got the royal treatment. Instead of chopping them up, they'd skewer the whole animal and prop it beside glowing coals. The heat reflected off nearby rocks, creating an outdoor oven effect that cooked everything perfectly. No metal, no electricity, no propane tanks. Then there's the practical side that modern campers still haven't figured out. When you're hunting miles from home, you can't exactly haul a kitchen around. Stick cooking meant eating fresh meat right at the kill site. No spoilage, no waste, no carrying heavy pots through thick forest. Different tribes had their own twists on the basic technique. Some wrapped fish in wet leaves before skewering, creating steam pockets that kept the meat moist. Others made multiple smaller sticks instead of one big one, cooking several portions simultaneously for larger groups. The beauty of this method was speed and flexibility. While one person tended the fire, others could prepare multiple sticks with different foods. Roots on one stick, fish on another, maybe some wild onions threaded between chunks of deer meat. Everything cooking at once, but each item getting the exact treatment it needed. Of course, stick cooking was just the beginning of their fire mastery. When they really wanted to get serious about heating things up, they discovered something even more ingenious than pointed sticks. Ever heard of boiling water without a pot? Native Americans figured this out thousands of years ago, and honestly, it's pretty genius. They'd take rocks heated in fire until they glowed red hot, then drop them straight into water-filled containers. The water would instantly bubble and hiss like a science experiment gone right. But here's where it gets interesting. These weren't metal pots we're talking about. We're dealing with animal hide bags, waterproof baskets, or even hollowed-out tree stumps. Drop a scorching rock into one of these makeshift containers, and boom, you've got boiling soup in seconds. The whole setup sounds crazy until you realize it actually works better than you'd think. The trick was keeping things moving. One rock would heat the water, but it'd cool down fast. Smart cooks kept multiple stones heating in the fire at once, rotating them like a tag team. Hot rock goes in, lukewarm rock comes out. This kept stews bubbling for hours without any fancy equipment. Then there's the rock selection process, which was way more important than it sounds. Toss the wrong kind of stone into boiling water and it'll crack or even explode. Not exactly what you want when making dinner. Tribes learned which rocks worked best through trial and probably some painful errors. Soapstone became the gold standard because it held heat forever and rarely split apart. Granite, forget about it. Too likely to shatter. Limestone was risky too, but find yourself some good soapstone or certain types of sandstone and you're cooking with reliable heat that won't blow up in your face. The speed of this method blew away other cooking techniques. While pit roasting took all day, rock boiling could have hot soup ready in minutes. Perfect for when hunting parties returned late or when weather turned nasty fast. No waiting around for coals to develop or fires to burn down to the right temperature. Some tribes got so good at this they could make elaborate stews with multiple ingredients, timing everything perfectly as different rocks heated different portions. Meat in one hide bag, vegetables in another, both bubbling away thanks to rotating hot stones. The whole camp would smell incredible within minutes. What's wild is how this technique spread across completely different tribes who probably never met each other. From Arctic communities to desert dwellers, everyone seemed to discover that hot rocks plus water equals instant cooking power. Makes you wonder what other simple solutions we've forgotten about in our modern kitchens. Speaking of forgotten techniques, there's another method that's even more surprising, one that turns ashes and coals into nature's perfect oven. Ever wonder how Native Americans managed to bake food without a single oven in sight? Well, they turned fire itself into their bakery. Hot coals and ash became the secret ingredients for some of the most flavorful cooking methods you've never heard of. Here's where things get clever. Instead of building elaborate cooking structures, tribes would wrap fish, sweet potatoes, corn, and other foods in large green leaves. Think of it as nature's aluminum foil, but way better. These leaf packages got buried directly into hot coals and covered with a thick blanket of ash. The ash worked like insulation, creating a gentle, even heat that cooked food slowly and thoroughly. But why ash? Turns out ash is basically nature's perfect cooking medium. It holds heat for hours without burning the food inside. The temperature stays steady, almost like a slow cooker made of fire debris. Plus, ash cooking gave food this amazing smoky flavor that you just can't get from modern ovens. The weird part is how moist everything stayed. You'd think burying food in what's essentially fire dust would dry it out completely. Nope. Those leaf wrappings trapped steam inside, keeping fish tender and roots perfectly soft. Some tribes even discovered that certain types of ash worked better than others. Hardwood ash was gold because it burned cleaner and lasted longer. Then there's the speed factor. While rock boiling took time to heat stones, ash cooking happened fast. Hunters could catch a fish, wrap it in leaves, bury it in yesterday's campfire coals, and have dinner ready before the sun set. No prep time, no fancy equipment, just dirt simple cooking that actually worked. Different tribes got creative with their wrapping techniques too. Some used corn husks for smaller items, others preferred broadleaves from local plants. The Pueblo people became masters at ash roasting corn, creating a technique so effective that some villages still use it today during traditional ceremonies. Makes sense when you think about it, right? These cooking methods weren't just survival tricks. They were carefully developed techniques that produced genuinely delicious food. Modern chefs are actually rediscovering ash cooking, though they usually do it in controlled restaurant settings rather than actual campfires. Of course, ash cooking worked great for individual meals and small groups, but what happened when entire families needed to eat together, or when tribes wanted to prepare massive feasts? That required thinking bigger, digging deeper, and creating something that could feed dozens of people at once. When you needed to feed 50 people at once, digging a small fire pit wasn't going to cut it. Native tribes across North America mastered the art of earth oven cooking, essentially turning the ground itself into a massive slow cooker that could handle entire deer, dozens of fish, or mountains of corn and vegetables. The process started with serious excavation work. Men would dig pits anywhere from 3 to 8 feet wide and several feet deep, depending on how many mouths needed feeding. But here's where it gets clever. They didn't just toss food into a dirt hole and hope for the best. First came the foundation layer of carefully selected stones. Not just any rocks would do, because some exploded when heated too quickly. The stones went directly into a roaring fire built right inside the pit, heating for hours until they glowed like tiny suns. Meanwhile, the cooking prep happened above ground. Deer quarters wrapped in wet hides, whole turkeys stuffed with wild rice, ears of corn still in their husks. Once those stones reached scorching temperatures, the real choreography began. Hot coals and stones formed the base layer, then came wet leaves or hides to create steam. Food got arranged in careful layers, dense items like root vegetables near the heat source, more delicate fish or birds toward the top. Green branches, more wet hides, and finally dirt sealed everything in tight. Then came the hardest part, waiting. These underground feasts cooked for anywhere from 6 to 24 hours, depending on what was inside. The earth itself became insulation, holding steady heat while slowly breaking down tough fibers and melding flavors together. Some tribes even built small fires on top of the sealed pit to add extra heat from above. The results were legendary. Meat fell off bones, vegetables turned silky smooth, and everything carried that distinctive, smoky, earthy flavor you simply cannot replicate any other way. Plus, the sheer quantity meant entire extended families could feast together, with enough leftovers to keep everyone fed for days. Different regions developed their own signature touches. Coastal tribes might layer in seaweed for extra minerals and ocean flavor. Prairie groups added wild onions and sage. Mountain communities used pine needles for a subtle resinous note. But the real genius wasn't just the cooking method, it was the social engineering. These massive earth ovens brought whole communities together for the preparation, the waiting, and finally, the grand unveiling. Makes you wonder how they managed to coordinate such elaborate cooking without burning everything to charcoal. Speaking of avoiding disasters, not everyone had access to convenient digging sites or enough people for such grand cooking projects. Clay wasn't exactly Amazon Prime delivery for Native Americans, but it sure beat trying to boil water with your bare hands. Southern tribes became absolute wizards at shaping mud into cooking vessels that could handle serious heat. The Cherokee and Creek peoples would dig up specific types of clay, mix it with crushed shells or sand, then hand-build pots that could feed entire families. No pottery wheels here, just skilled fingers and generations of knowledge passed down through grandmothers who knew exactly how thick the walls needed to be. But clay wasn't the only game in town. Coastal tribes looked around and basically said, why make pots when the ocean already did? Giant conch shells became perfect boiling vessels. Sea turtle shells worked even better. They were huge, naturally waterproof, and came with their own built-in handles. Makes sense, right? These shells could hold gallons of soup and handle the heat from hot rocks dropped inside. Then there were the wooden bowl masters. Tribes across the continent would hollow out burls and thick tree sections, creating bowls that lasted for years. The trick was finding the right wood, something that wouldn't crack when hot stones hit the water inside. Maple and oak were popular choices, but it took serious skill to carve them without splitting the grain. The weird part is how creative people got with temporary containers. Some groups would weave tight baskets from plant fibers, then coat the inside with pine pitch or clay slip to make them waterproof. Others used large pieces of birch bark, folding them into box shapes and sealing the corners. These throwaway pots were perfect for hunting trips or seasonal camps where carrying heavy clay wasn't practical. Let's not forget the steamers. Native Americans figured out that you could weave loose baskets specifically designed to let steam through while keeping food contained. Drop one of these over a pit with hot stones and wet leaves, and you've got a pressure cooker that would make modern chefs jealous. The durability question was always interesting. Clay pots might shatter if you looked at them wrong, but treat them right and they'd last months or even years. Shell containers were tough, but eventually cracked. Wooden bowls were nearly indestructible, but took forever to make. What's really impressive is how these natural containers shaped entire cooking styles. Different materials meant different heat distribution, different flavors, different possibilities. But even the best pots in the world couldn't solve the biggest challenge, making food last through brutal winters when hunting got scarce. Ever wonder how native tribes managed to eat well through brutal winters without a single grocery store in sight? The secret wasn't just catching food, it was making it last. And they turned this into an art form that would make modern food scientists jealous. Smoking was probably the most genius preservation trick ever invented. Tribes built special huts or lean-to structures where they'd hang strips of meat, fish, and even vegetables over slow-burning fires. The smoke did two incredible things at once. It dried out the moisture that causes rot, and it coated everything in natural chemicals that killed bacteria. Think of it as nature's own preservative spray, except it actually made food taste better instead of worse. But here's where it gets really clever. Different tribes use different woods for different flavors and preservation powers. Cedar gave fish a sweet, clean taste. Hickory made venison taste like heaven. Oak created the strongest preservation effect. Some coastal tribes even used dried seaweed as fuel, giving their salmon a salty ocean flavor that lasted for months. The steaming process was equally brilliant. Tribes would dig shallow pits, line them with green leaves or animal hides, then drop red-hot stones inside. They'd add just enough water to create steam, then pile in corn, roots, or chunks of meat. The green leaves kept everything moist while the steam cooked food perfectly and gently. This wasn't just cooking. It was the first step in creating foods that would keep longer without spoiling. Then, there's the drying game, which was absolutely crucial for survival. After successful hunts, entire villages would work together to slice hundreds of pounds of meat into thin strips. These got hung on wooden racks in the sun and wind until they turned into jerky so hard you could use it as a hammer. Well, maybe not quite that hard, but close. Berries got the same treatment. Blueberries, cranberries, and chokecherries were spread on bark mats and left to shrivel into concentrated nuggets of nutrition. Some tribes mixed dried berries with ground nuts and fat to create something called pemmican. Basically the world's first energy bar, except it actually tasted good and could last for years if stored properly. The weird part is how much food they could preserve this way. Archaeological evidence shows some villages stockpiled over 300 pounds of dried meat after major hunts. That's enough protein to feed a family of 4 for an entire winter. Smart preservation meant the difference between thriving and starving. But even with all this preserved food, tribes still needed to stay flexible and adapt their cooking methods as seasons changed completely. Native Americans weren't just good cooks, they were survival masterminds who could turn any season into dinner time. When winter rolled around with its brutal cold, tribes in northern regions knew that slow-cooked stews weren't just comfort food, they were lifesavers. These meals packed maximum calories and kept bellies warm for hours. Smart move when you're dealing with temperatures that could freeze your eyeballs. Spring brought different challenges entirely. Tribes had to pack up and follow game or find fresh fishing spots. Their cooking gear? It had to be light, portable, and tough as nails. Clay pots got left behind for lighter wooden bowls. Fire-starting kits became more important than fancy cooking tools. Makes sense when you're basically nomadic chefs on the move. Summer was showtime for food preservation wizards. Tribes would smoke massive amounts of fish during peak season, sometimes processing hundreds of pounds in just days. The goal wasn't just feeding everyone right now, it was banking calories for the lean months ahead. Think of it as the world's first meal prep service, except failure meant starvation. But here's where things get really interesting. Different tribes started swapping cooking secrets like ancient food bloggers. A Cherokee technique for steaming corn might travel hundreds of miles north to an Iroquois village. Coastal tribes shared their shell-boiling tricks with inland groups who had never seen an ocean. This wasn't just friendly neighbor stuff. It was cultural evolution happening around campfires. The waste not, want not mentality would make today's zero-waste movement jealous. Bones became soup stock, then tools, then needles. Fish scales got ground into meal. Even intestines became storage bags for rendered fat. Nothing edible hit the ground without serving multiple purposes first. Weather dictated everything from fire placement to cooking times. Desert tribes learned to cook during cooler dawn hours, while Arctic communities mastered the art of indoor cooking without suffocating from smoke. Each region developed its own bag of tricks based on what Mother Nature threw at them. Trading networks meant a tribe might use cooking stones quarried 500 miles away, or clay techniques learned from completely different language groups. Innovation spread faster than gossip at a village gathering. The real genius wasn't any single technique. It was the ability to adapt, improvise, and never waste an opportunity to eat well. These weren't primitive people making do with less. They were culinary artists working with everything nature provided, creating flavors and preservation methods that kept entire communities thriving for thousands of years. Their legacy lives on every time someone grills over an open fire or slow cooks a meal in cast iron.